At least one person in Kuwait has died after Iranian drone and missile strikes hit the international airport and other civilian infrastructures. More than 60 others were wounded. The attacks forced Kuwaiti authorities to divert flights and close the airport earlier today. Some operations have resumed. Tehran's attacks mark an escalation for Kuwait, a close U.S. ally, which had seen relative calm since the temporary Iran war ceasefire in April. Kuwait has condemned Iran for targeting civilian and vital facilities, stating it has the right to respond to Iranian aggressions. The U.S. and Iran are exchanging blame over the latest strikes. Tehran says its attacks on Gulf countries are in response to overnight U.S. strikes on Iran, while the U.S. says its actions were defensive and came after Iran attempted attacks across the Middle East, which were intercepted. And our correspondents have been monitoring developments for CNA. We have Blake Sifton joining us live from Tel Aviv and Toni Waterman standing by in Washington, D.C. Now, Blake, let's start with you. We know that the Kuwait airport has been hit, but what is the extent of the damage from U.S. and Iranian strikes in the region?
Good evening, Angela. Now, we've seen multiple flare-ups of violence between Iran and the United States in recent weeks, but this was a very serious escalation. Kuwaiti authorities say 63 people, including passengers and airport workers, were injured in those strikes that damaged and briefly took offline the country's main civilian airport. And they also said there was damage sustained to unspecified diplomatic missions. And that airport only reopened on Monday after being closed since the Iran war began. Now, we should also note that this was not simply an attack and a response to that attack. It was a series of back and forth attacks between Iran and the U.S. that escalated and culminated in that attack on the airport. So that is raising fears that these continuous cycles of violence between Iran and the United States could eventually spiral out of control and see a return to full war. In addition to Kuwait, Bahrain suffered serious attacks, and Iran has said that they will more directly target Gulf states that host U.S. bases, saying that they bore direct and clear responsibility for U.S. attacks. The IRGC also affirmed that they have escalated, saying, "We had previously warned that in case of aggression, the response would be different and more severe, and we acted accordingly." Now, meanwhile, in Lebanon, despite a new ceasefire being announced there by President Trump just a few days ago, the violence is continuing. The Israeli military has continued carrying out airstrikes in the south and on a highway leading to Beirut. And there are reports of further Hezbollah rockets, being fired toward northern Israel.
Blake, thank you for that update. Now, Toni, let's go over to you now. All of these developments, of course, raising concerns about the state of peace negotiations following the strikes. But the U.S. president, he seems quite optimistic. What can you tell us about his response?
Well, the president's optimism should be taken with a grain of salt. He has been saying the U.S. has won this war, that it's been a great success, that a peace deal is close for months now, yet the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. Iran retains its enriched uranium. The strikes continue, as you just heard from Blake there, and there is no deal at this point. In fact, Iran remains quite defiant. Mohsen Razi, who is a top Iranian official, posted on X a couple of hours ago that Tehran will not allow the U.S. to overreach, in its words, in negotiations or the ceasefire process. This comes, of course, amid President Trump's claims that Iran has already agreed to give up its nuclear weapons. This has not been confirmed by Tehran, and its public comments since the very start have indicated that this would be a red line for the regime. Now, one area that may warrant some cautious optimism is the situation in Lebanon. Top diplomats from Israel and Beirut are meeting again today, Wednesday, here in Washington. They spoke for 7 hours on Tuesday, and those discussions really focused on implementing an already agreed to ceasefire. The U.S. ambassador to Lebanon, Michelle Issa, describing the talks as positive, but resolving this conflict between Israel and the Iran proxy Hezbollah in Lebanon is crucial to negotiations with Iran. Tehran has said that no U.S. peace deal can be reached without a ceasefire in Lebanon. And President Trump, in a podcast interview that aired on Wednesday morning, admitted to this very tense phone call with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu earlier this week, saying that he was perturbed that Netanyahu was constantly fighting in Lebanon. Axios, which is an online media outlet here in the United States, in their reporting said that Trump had used expletives against the Israeli Prime Minister, calling him crazy, an indication perhaps that this rift between Washington and Israel is growing, this rift on how to bring these conflicts to an end.
Toni, Blake, thank you for those updates. That was Blake Sifton in Tel Aviv and Toni Waterman in Washington, D.C., covering this story for CNA.